All right, guys, Murph's here. And today, we're going to talk about this. A Mossberg chambered in 12 gauge. Now, when we're talking about this, we're going to talk about a little bit of history. Mossberg came out with the Model 500 shotgun in 1961. And a couple of years later, they would come out with the 500A, a couple of years being over a decade in 1974, of which this is technically a 500A. Now, I looked around for what the differences were between a 500 and a 500A, and all that was cited were minor differences. So I take that to mean that there was either a production refinement or perhaps like a manufacturing process refinement, or maybe some features were minorly changed. Like nothing that really constituted a full, all new gun as much as just a subcategory of the above. Regardless, the 500 designation is used pretty interchangeably on these shotguns, and the Mossberg Model 500 has become a staple of the Mossberg line. This is the flagship shotgun. Even if it's not their most expensive, it is one of their most popular. So much so that there's a little bit of a competition between Remington 870s and Mossberg 500s. There are a lot of people who are in one camp or the other. Now, longtime viewers of the channel know that I own both Remington 870s and now Mossberg 500s. And if you're interested in my Remington 870 reviews, go ahead and check out the links in the description. So you could say that I'm the person who wants to have my cake and eat it too. However, there are places where I feel the Remington 870 outperforms the Mossberg 500 and vice versa. And we'll discuss that more later on in the video. Regardless, Mossberg has produced these shotguns in a wide variety of packages. You can get these in field combos with a slug barrel or perhaps two different lengths of barrels. You can get these in the Bantam series, which is a lightweight setup. You can get them in youth length stocks. You can get them in a variety of different coatings and finishes and camo patterns and all that kind of stuff. There is not much that you cannot get with the Mossberg 500 within its overall feature set. Now, these shotguns have gained wide acceptance amongst police and military crowds and have been a longtime favorite for your average self-defense requirement as well. All right, guys, that pretty much covers the features, covers the history portion of this. Why don't we go ahead and get into the features of this particular shotgun? Right off the bat, we have a 20-inch barrel, which, so in the kind of defensive-minded versions of the Mossberg 500, of which we are very clearly looking at right now, you'll have two barrel lengths. You'll have an 18-inch barrel and a 20-inch barrel. The 18-inch barrel is most commonly paired with a 5-shot capacity magazine tube. This one is paired with a 7-shot capacity magazine tube. Why don't we go ahead and get into a little bit of discussion about the magazine tubes. Mossberg will frequently refer to this as an 8-shot capacity shotgun, and that's not untrue, but it's a little bit misleading. Most of the time, whenever manufacturers list the capacity of a firearm, they leave out the round of the chamber. They will say things like, well, this Glock 17 holds 17 plus 1 in the chamber, requiring you to do a little bit of math, or at least laying out the math for you to do. Sometimes in shotgun manufacturing, they don't do that. They just refer to the capacity of the gun plus 1 in the chamber. So this is a 7-shot magazine tube plus 1 in the chamber for an 8-shot capacity shotgun. Now, I don't know why sometimes manufacturers do that with their shotguns, but it's pretty much only done with shotguns. And it causes quite a bit of confusion amongst those in like forums and stuff like that who are sitting there going like, why can't I fit more than 7 rounds in my shotgun? It says it's an 8-shot shotgun. Is it broken? When that's not necessarily the case. Another important thing to keep in mind whenever it is that we talk about shotgun capacity is that it depends on the length of shell you put in it. Most manufacturers, if they have a 2 3/4 inch chambered gun, they base the capacity around a 2 3/4 inch chamber or 2 3/4 inch round. If you add 3-inch rounds, that'll probably change your capacity. And going the other direction, if you add Aguila mini shells, it's going to change the capacity yet again. So, 7 plus 1. We have a bead type sight, which is generally, get that a little bit closer. We have a bead type sight, which longtime viewers of the channel know that I'm a big fan of bead type sights whenever it comes to wing shooting or pass shooting and stuff like that. However, that is not what this shotgun is set up for. And we'll talk about this sight more once we get into the shooting portion. This is a fixed improved cylinder bore, which is appropriate for a more tactically minded shotgun. You can run slug, buck, bird, less than lethal loads, whatever it is that you want to out of this shotgun with no concerns about constriction. Now, at first glance with this long magazine tube, somebody might mistake this for a Mossberg 590, but there's a very significant difference between a Mossberg 590 and a Mossberg 500. And it all has to do with how the barrel attaches to the magazine tube. So on a Mossberg 590, the shank goes around the magazine tube, and then a cap is placed above it, keeping it in place and keeping the magazine tube and all that kind of stuff together. On the Mossberg 500, the magazine tube threads over top of the barrel shank, as we can see here. So there's the thread, there's the barrel shank right here, then we have the magazine tube. So what does that mean in this case, Murph? Well, on a Mossberg 590, you could ostensibly extend the capacity beyond what the gun comes with extension tubes and all that kind of stuff. On a Mossberg 500, you cannot, not without heavy modification. So that's an important detail to keep in mind. You are stuck at the 7+1 capacity of this shotgun. You are stuck with this length of tube, I guess is the more accurate way to state that. All right, I want to go ahead and talk about this camouflage pattern while we're at it. This is Mossberg's Desert Sandstorm camo pattern. And this is where things get a little bit weird whenever it is that we talk about this particular shotgun. Something that we need to keep in mind with this shotgun is that I have almost 20 years of experience with this particular gun. My dad bought this almost 20 years ago, and then it came into my possession sometime after that. I have a real issue when it comes to commercial manufacturers of firearms. And a lot of that comes down to they don't necessarily do a good job of keeping records on specialty run items, or perhaps distributor exclusives, or even just short runs that they did of their own production guns. Unlike military manufacturers, where every change is annotated in some way or another. There's a record kept of every change, and it's something that you can very easily reference and keep track of. The M1 carbine is a fantastic example. M1 Garands, anything in the military surplus realm has a record associated with it. It's very easy to be able to track down when a gun was produced and all those types of things. Now, of course, we can still do that with serial numbers and all this kind of stuff, but right now, there is nothing that looks like this in the Mossberg product catalog. And in doing research, trying to find a gun with this same camouflage pattern was very difficult. And the closest I got was the just-in-case Mossberg 500, which was a pistol grip Mossberg 500 that came with a airtight, waterproof case that you could store for worst-case scenario, survival, end of the world, whatever. And they produced that in the Desert Sandstorm camo pattern. That's the only other gun that I've been able to find that looks like this. Also, in addition to that, looking through Mossberg's current product catalog, snapshot in time, as of right now, there is nothing with this length of magazine tube on it. Everything is the 5-shot model with the 18-inch barrel, or is some sort of sporty model, so on and so forth. So you won't find this camouflage pattern on shelves right now, and apparently you also won't find this capacity, though I've seen these guns on shelves. Maybe it was just used shelves and I wasn't really paying that close of attention because I already have one. So, Desert Sandstorm, we can see where some of the finish is flaked off over the years, and we have black synthetic furniture underneath. Our forestock is kind of the rat tail type setup, which is very deep grooves, very easy to hang on to and all that kind of stuff. I've never had a problem with running this shotgun. We have dual action bars, which is more or less an industry standard right now, especially for ensuring reliability. This is a 3-inch chambered gun. The top of our receiver is drilled and tapped for an optics mount, if you so choose. We also have this kind of very shallow gutter, which you could help to use to line up your bead sight. We'll talk about that more yet again whenever it is that we get into features. This receiver is alloy. That's a feature of not only modern shotguns, but also the Mossberg 500. But the bolt is still steel, so there is a extension of the barrel itself that the bolt locks into so that you don't have steel locking into alloy, because that's not a good long-term solution. Our safety is ambidextrous and placed on top of the receiver tang. And this, I've got to say, guys, honestly, when you take a look at all the features and like buttons and bits of this particular shotgun, it's probably got the best setup on the market. Now, this safety is made of plastic. Earlier guns had steel safeties. I had a Mossberg 500 with a steel safety once upon a time. Now, with this, you can grab it from either side, of course, so it's good for both left and right-handed users, as well as it is a very natural place for your thumb to rest with your finger straight along the side of the receiver whenever it is that you're looking to actively use this shotgun. It's something that I really appreciate about this setup. Now, also, our slide release is located on this side of the gun back towards the semi-pistol grip. And I also really like this because it's very natural to grab right here, already have that slide release accessible so that you can go ahead and rack that first round in there. So this is an exceedingly ergonomic setup. A lot of times in previous reviews, I've talked about how much I like the Winchester 1200 safety setup as opposed to the Remington Model 870, which if you're interested in the Winchester 1200s, go ahead and check out the links in the description to those videos. But one of my biggest issues with the Model 1200 is that I love the safety placement in front of the trigger guard, but I don't love the slide release placement where I have to actually like turn the gun over and get my thumb in there in order to be able to activate it. This, very natural, very easy. So I've got to say, between those three brands, this has the best ergonomics when it comes to accessing the manual of arms. Now, the trigger group is made of plastic, and this is something that could cause you an issue depending on what it is that you're doing. The average person is not going to have a problem with this plastic trigger guard. However, the 590s and like the A1s and stuff like that come with a metal trigger group and are technically more durable. Now, I think the only people that that really applies to would be like military or police users, because both have a tendency to be very tough on firearms, especially shotguns, because they're kind of considered to be more tools than necessarily like frontline weapons or anything along those lines. So something to keep in mind there. Average person, not going to have an issue with this. I saw one review some years ago comparing a 500 and a 590, and they, through destructive style testing, managed to create an issue out of this plastic trigger group, and the 590 continued to soldier on. But I don't think most of us are ever going to run into that type of situation. Okay, we have a semi-pistol grip, as I mentioned before, and I'm a huge fan, as always, longtime viewers of the channel know, of the semi-pistol grip. I like being able to pull this into my shoulder and get nice and firm on the gun. So we can see here I have a crappy nylon shell carrier that's almost completely useless. Something that I've always had a complaint with on Mossberg shotguns is the length of pull. They generally have a longer stock. And while the stock is maybe a little long for me, it's closer to being properly sized than what I normally look for in a shotgun stock. I prefer short, fast, handy setups and something that's very rapid to the shoulder, whereas something at this length, I could get it caught in my armpit on the way up. Which is why, especially for bird type guns, I prefer a shorter stock. However, this is not a bird type gun, as we previously mentioned. We'll talk about that more as we go. We can see here that I have sling swivels and a crappy nylon sling attached to the gun. We have a beefy rubber butt pad that does a pretty good job of soaking up recoil. All right, guys. I think that pretty much covers features. Why don't we go ahead and see how it shoots. All right, guys, now I've alluded to it a couple of times. Let's go ahead and talk about this bead, because if we're talking about like slugs and buckshot, or excuse me, if we're talking about like buckshot and birdshot and all that kind of stuff, a shotgun is a shotgun is a shotgun. This gun performs just fine with those rounds. It gets a good pattern. It'll put hits on target, all that kind of stuff. But slugs are really the deciding factor here, because we have this bead and maybe kind of a trough type setup here. So whenever it is that I'm trying to shoot slugs off of this bead sight, it is quite difficult. Now here recently, this shotgun has been featured in a series that I've been doing comparing shotguns to other defensive firearm options. And I have been shooting slugs. I've fired about 10 rounds of slugs out of this gun across that series thus far. And I have not had 10 hits on steel at just 50 yards. I've had like 2, maybe. I have to review the footage to know for sure. But like, it's not batting 1,000 when it comes to slugs. And a lot of that comes down to, yes, I have 2 different focal planes here to be able to line up in order to try to get a precision shot, but they are very imprecise alignment. There's a lot of space in this trough. That bead is not necessarily like, it's not very large. There's not a whole lot to work off of in order to be able to gauge where it is that I need to place my sight in order to be able to make hits. You know, do I bury the bead all the way in the trough so that I just see the top of it and work off of that? Or do I set the bead on top of the trough in order to be able to work off so that it's more prominent, it's easier for me to be able to make adjustments off of? Am I hitting low? Am I hitting high? Am I hitting left? Am I hitting right? Because of course also we don't necessarily have a precision trigger setup in here either. So it's kind of fighting uphill to use slugs at distance off of a bead sight. It's not impossible, it's just not optimal. And we have to be, and I've discussed this before on the channel, we have to be careful whenever it is that we play around in suboptimal conditions, because there's a reason they are suboptimal. If we're fighting for our lives, we want optimal. Now, what about this length of pull, Murph? Like, has this been an issue for you, like doing rapid targets and all that kind of stuff? I haven't really noticed it, but sometimes when I'm practicing, I do kind of drag this rubber butt pad through my pocket. If I had a jacket on and stuff like that, it would be a lot more of an issue. That's one of the things you have to take into account whenever it is that you're talking about these longer stock type setups. When you combine them with a jacket, it's really going to change your options. It's really going to change how it is that it works around you, especially with this rubber butt pad. It's going to grab things. So great, this is very comfortable to work around and all that kind of stuff, but if it's getting stuck in your armpit on the way up, this could be the difference between life and death in a defensive type situation. Now also, this rubber butt pad, I've shot this gun with primarily 2 3/4 inch shells, but also some 3-inch shells along the way, and the pad has done an adequate job. 12 gauge shotguns especially are heavy recoiling options. There's not a whole lot you can do about that because you're kind of just a slave to mass, except trust in your heavy butt pad and do the best that you can to not notice it at the time, which I've been shooting shotguns like the entire time I've been shooting guns, so I don't really notice in the moment 12 gauge recoil as much as maybe some others do. All right, guys, that's shooting. Why don't we go ahead and get into my recommendations when it comes to this particular shotgun? Would I recommend this for duty type use? Absolutely. The Mossberg 500 has been serving in duty type capacities for decades now, and has been doing so very well. Now, is the plastic trigger guard going to be a big detriment to you? Probably not. I'm going to maintain that it's probably not going to be that big of an issue, but if it's something that you're concerned about, you can swap these out if you so choose. Now, I think a lot of this comes down to application. What is your duty type application? In my opinion, shotguns are more valid for law enforcement than they are for military. But if you change conditions just a little bit and you wind up back in like jungles of Vietnam or something along those lines, the shotgun has very credible advantages in that case. So I don't completely disagree with the military use of shotguns. I just don't think they're as helpful as maybe they're made out to be. That's been my overall theme whenever it comes to discussing shotguns in defensive or duty type capacities. All right, so based off of that, would I recommend this for self-defense, home defense? Home defense, this has been a home defense option for me. So yes, I would absolutely recommend this shotgun for that type of use. For self-defense, this would not be my first choice for a truck gun. It's very long, and shooting a 12 gauge from like suboptimal positions and stuff like that isn't terribly enjoyable. So I would not necessarily recommend this as a truck gun. But if you're talking about like a life and liberty gun, I think it still comes down to what are your expected fighting conditions. If you're expecting to move around a lot in like heavy brush, okay, sure. You're talking about relatively close engagement distances and perhaps needing to be able to hit rapid moving targets or be able to throw out a lot of shot to be able to carve away brush so that everyone else can see where it is that they need to be shooting. Sure, a shotgun has a shotgun, and specifically this Mossberg 500, have an application in that case. If you're talking about like, oh, well, I mean, it's a shotgun, it's a great close range option, I want to use this for room clearing. This is a very long gun to try to clear rooms with. I would not recommend it for that purpose. You need an SBS at that point to really adequately accomplish that task. Okay, well, what about as a competition gun? Well, if you were doing 3-gun and shooting the heavy metal category, we're supposed to shoot a 1911 chambered in .45 ACP, a .308 battle rifle, and a pump action 12 gauge shotgun, then knock yourself out, man. You will be competitive in that division. If you're talking about like, I'm just going to take this into any class of shotgun competition, be it 3-gun or otherwise, you're not necessarily going to perform that well. So if your goal is, well, I want to take my defensive option or I want to take my duty option out and I want to train with it and all that kind of stuff and I want to do it in competition, hey, more power to you. Understand that you are not going to be competitive against somebody running a Benelli M4, at least if they run it well. So keep that in mind as well. What about as a hunting gun? This would not be my first choice for a hunting gun, to be completely honest. If you're talking about doing some sort of like upland game or waterfowl, absolutely not. This is not what this gun is designed for. This longer stock, it would not be my first choice already. In addition to the fact that like you're stuck with an improved cylinder choke. A 20-inch barrel is at least kind of handy and brush and stuff like that, but you need a super long dowel rod in order to be able to probably be in compliance with your local laws and stuff like that. And if a game warden finds you, they're going to check your plug. That's a guarantee. However, I do have to say that as a kid, I did hunt with a Mossberg 590 with a 4-power optic on it, and I hunted deer with it. I actually took a couple of deer with it. So with this having an optics mount, you could throw a red dot or a low power scope or something along those lines and take this thing deer hunting. Just remember your plug, or stay in compliance with whatever your local state laws are. So it could work. It looks weird. Trust me, it looks very weird, but it would work. And if it's stupid but it works, it's not stupid. So there we go. All right, well, what about as like a woods gun or something along those lines? Well, I wouldn't take this thing hiking necessarily, but camping or bebopping around like my property or something along those lines, this wouldn't be a bad choice, especially since like it being a shotgun, you have so many load opportunities that you could use. You could have this thing loaded up with slugs or buck, and this would be enough to be able to stop a bear or any other predatory game. But something to keep in mind if you're going to be taking on bear is that if you're stuck with this bead sight, you're probably going to want that bear to get a little bit closer to you for you to be able to engage it accurately. And of course, that's very nerve-wracking if you're dealing with a charging bear. Like you pretty much want to start shooting immediately. But with the accuracy capabilities, or at least my accuracy capabilities with this shotgun, I would not want to be taking 100-yard shots on a bear with a slug out of this. I wouldn't really want to take 50-yard shots on a bear with a slug out of this. Now, of course, a bear is a very large target, but that does not mean that everything I hit on a bear is going to necessarily dissuade it from continuing to come over to eat me. So keep that in mind. It's still important to be able to put accurate, effective hits on whatever it is that your target is, not just touch it somewhere and hope that it's enough. Hope is not what we're supposed to be relying on here. Actual application and good fundamentals and all that kind of stuff, that's what we're supposed to be relying on here. All right, guys, what are my uses for this shotgun? Well, previously I have used this as a home defense option. I would more than gladly do so again. It's just right now I'm not really reaching for shotguns as home defense options. My ready rack has like rifles, like my absolute like tip top ready to go rack. It has a rifle on it, and then my like ready locker, which is kind of for more like dire world just ended type situations, only has like one shotgun in it. Everything else in there is rifles. So I'm not saying that I wouldn't use this for self-defense. I'm saying that shotguns still rate very low on my self-defense spectrum. Now, if I were to add an optic to that and a light, this thing would figure more strongly in my self-defense strategy. But as it sits right now, this is pretty bare bones and not necessarily what I'm reaching for right off the bat. What would be some competitive offerings out on the market? Well, the first place, in my opinion, to go to is the Remington 870. Now, I did mention before that I was going to talk about like my opinions when it comes to the Remington 870 versus the Mossberg 500. Historically, the Mossberg 500s for me, with how they're stocked and stuff like that, be it the 500 or the 535 or the 935, whatever it is that it may be, these shotguns have always come across to me more as either slug guns or defensive type shotguns. Whereas the Remington 870, I've always felt like it had a flow and lines to it that made it very good as a bird gun, especially for waterfowl. But Remington does make a comparable featured 870 tactical that would be competitive to the shotgun. The only thing you have to keep in mind with that is the Freedom Arms Group pretty much destroyed the Remington brand. So I would encourage you to look at used Remington 870s more so than new production Remington 870s. There are a lot of issues, especially in the dying days of Freedom Arms Group and Remington, getting ready to declare bankruptcy and all that kind of stuff. There was a lot of QC issues with Freedom Arms Group and Remington specific products. So I would definitely encourage you to be a little bit more aware of like serial number ranges and stuff like that and buy older used 870 tacticals. And then another competitive option would be the Winchester SXP Defender. I have no experience with the SXP, but it is the latest iteration of both the Winchester Model 1200 and 1300 shotguns, and I have had a long time love affair with the 1200 and 1300 shotguns. I have quite the collection of 1200s, in fact. So take that for what you will. All right, guys. I think that pretty much covers my thoughts on this particular subject. Hope you guys found this interesting, and that's pretty much what I got. Have a good day.